The $100 billion secret that built North Korea. The bank's lobby smelled like burned wires when the auditors walked in. Screens were blank. By nightfall, deposits were evaporating from a place most Americans couldn't find on a map, Macau. What started as a routine review had cracked the edge of a money machine that fed missiles, mansions, and a myth. Your card swipe and a North Korean shipment were on the same rails. The date, September 15, 2005. The bank, Banco Delta Asia. One U.S. Treasury memo labeled it a primary money laundering concern. Pull that thread, and Bureau 39, Pyongyang's cash factory, comes into focus. The map of the money machine. Think of the network as a relay where the baton is value, not cash. The starter block is Bureau 39, an organ built to generate hard currency wherever law, risk, and opportunity overlap. It seeds state trading companies, turns diplomats into couriers, and pairs with brokers who can turn sanctioned commodities into spendable dollars. The baton moves to offshore hubs, Macau first, later Hong Kong, Shenzhen, Dandong, Singapore, where small banks and money service businesses plug into mid-tier correspondents, which in turn touch U.S. dollar clearers. The layers stack neatly when you see them once. Layer 1, production, coal exported off the books, iron ore and seafood funneled through Chinese brokers, overseas labor whose wages are largely confiscated through loyalty contributions, and across the 199s and 200s, revenue tied by credible investigations to counterfeit supernotes. Methamphetamine connected to chemical complexes like Hamhyung, and wildlife contraband that surfaced in seizures involving North Korean diplomats in parts of Africa. Layer 2, transit. Chinese intermediaries and freight forwarders who blend cargo, switch vessels mid-sea, tweak bills of lading, and run AIS dark just long enough to confuse insurers and port authorities. Layer 3, the liquidity taps banks with correspondent relationships. You don't need a Wall Street tower. You need a small Asian bank linked to a mid-tier that clears dollars in New York. That's the weak link in the magic trick. Once funds hit a correspondent chain, payments look like any other trade settlement, especially when buried under shells with nominee directors and innocuous HS codes. The camouflage is routine on paper because documents are manufactured to align. Why build it this way? Regime survival runs on hard currency. Offshore platforms bring that currency to market. Western liquidity makes it spendable anywhere. Deniable logistics erase fingerprints. Policy matters, but the hinge is reputation weaponized. Section 311 of the USA Patriot Act and the September 2005 designation that made Banco Delta Asia radioactive. That move didn't seize the world, it scared it. Touch dirty DPRK money, and you risk losing your dollar lifeline. There's a personal price here. The same schemes that move coal and luxury goods stress the pipes you rely on. Banks spooked by reputational blast radius raise fees, kill entire corridors, and slow payments. Insurers price uncertainty into shipping. That's the invisible tax of illicit finance. But to see how the network keeps running after shocks like BDA, we go to the source, the factory that turns isolation into cash. Bureau 39 isn't a rumor, it's a workflow. The factory of illicit wealth. Inside Bureau 39. Bureau 39 was born from scarcity. Kim Il-sung needed foreign currency to fund a system isolated from markets. Kim Jong-il scaled it into a diversified portfolio. In a country where the official economy starved, this bureau became the private engine for the leadership, insulated from ration lines, responsible for loyalty perks, and essential for buying components no domestic factory could make. The stakes were concrete. Missile programs required parts purchased abroad. Elites needed visible rewards to stay in line. Party organs needed cash to function. Bureau 39 delivered. Its mandates span the map. State trading companies flew national flags but operated like cartel subsidiaries. A cultural troupe might leave with instruments and return with envelopes sewn into suit linings. Diplomats doubled as dealers, protected by immunity but watched by handlers, their embassies required to be self-financing and remit hard currency. The target never changed. Dollars and euros untraceable to the leader's offer. The revenue stack evolved with pressure. In the 199s and 200s, U.S. authorities described high-grade counterfeit $100 bills, supernotes, appearing across Asia and Europe. Investigations and think tank reports tied DPRK-linked networks to methamphetamine production that leaked into Japan, with the Hamhyung chemical complex frequently cited by defectors and analysts. Wildlife contraband, ivory, rhino horn surfaced in seizures involving North Korean diplomats in several African states, documented by watchdogs and media. None of this was ideological. If it could be monetized and moved, it fit the portfolio. But the biggest money often looked old-fashioned: commodities and labor. Coal and iron ore moved through Chinese brokers even as UN bans tightened, tucked into mixed cargo or declared under false origins. Petroleum flowed in via ship-to-ship transfers beyond radar range, backfilling domestic markets so export cash could keep flowing. Overseas laborers, construction crews in Russia's Far East, factory workers in Chinese border towns, teams dispatched to parts of Africa or the Gulf, earned wages that, by credible human rights reporting, were largely confiscated by the state through mandatory remittances and controlled dormitory systems. Families back home depended on a sliver. The regime captured the rest. Front companies made it look ordinary. A Dandong trader registered a shell with a Chinese figurehead. A Hong Kong entity appeared as exporter, its beneficial owner buried behind a trust. Bills of lading listed everyday goods, spare parts, textiles, recyclables, while the actual cargo told a different story or simply didn't exist. Trade-based laundering thrived. Over-invoicing to move value out, under-invoicing to hide proceeds, phantom shipments where documents traveled and cranes never moved. On a desk in Pyongyang, the ledger matched because the paperwork was written to match. Here's the human edge. A North Korean accountant tracked every dollar in a ledger knowing one mismatch could end his career and his safety. A captain sat in a wheelhouse off Ningbo, told to shut off AIS for 3 hours and take fuel from a ship with no markings. He signed a log showing a different time and latitude. A junior diplomat in southern Africa carried a heavy suitcase through a VIP channel, sweating under fluorescent lights, thinking more about his family's apartment assignment than the wildlife products inside. They weren't supervillains. They were cogs under pressure, paid in security and punished in fear. Diversification was the advantage. When one stream got hot, another expanded. When counterfeit currency drew attention, coal ramped. When coal got banned, ships went dark and cargoes blended. When tracking ships got easier, cyber crews launched spearphishing campaigns and crypto raids, turning code into cash and routing it through over-the-counter brokers in China and Hong Kong. Cyber didn't replace coal or labor, it added shock absorbers. Snap one line and 2 more took the strain. At home, contradictions told the story. During famine years, the inner circle imported liquor and European cars. High-end watches and luxury handbags turned into loyalty tokens. Kim Jong-il and later Kim Jong-un rewarded generals, party cadres, and rising Danju merchants with gifts that signaled proximity to power. Those goods weren't indulgences, they were governance in a sanctions economy. A loyalist with a new apartment and imported whiskey is more invested than a hungry colonel with nothing to lose. Sanctioned exports morphed into off-book cargo carried by Chinese companies or routed through Russian Far East ports. Flags of convenience disguised vessels. Renamed hulls shrugged off past violations. Insurers worked the gray, sometimes unaware, sometimes unconvinced, always balancing paperwork with premium. The regime didn't need every shipment to succeed. It needed enough to keep hard currency accounts steady and elites satisfied. But cash isn't power unless it can touch the wider financial system. That was Bureau 39's constant constraint. You can sell coal for yuan across the river, but to buy precision components in Europe or reward a loyal cadre with a German sedan, you need dollars or euros or at least a path to them. That's why Macau mattered. Small enough to be flexible, plugged in enough to open dollar doors, and close enough to feel familiar. In September 2005, when the United States pointed Section 311 at Banco Delta Asia, the Bureau's quiet pipeline hit a wall. Outside, the reaction was fast. Correspondents fled, clients lined up, and roughly $24 million in North Korean-related accounts froze, a small amount globally, a gut punch locally. Six-party talks detoured into bank logistics. The point landed. Reputation could do what raids couldn't. Banks across the region recalibrated, closing accounts and hardening controls against patterns Treasury highlighted. Front companies with generic profiles, bulk cash accepted without source scrutiny, and tolerance for activity matching DPRK typologies. Bureau 39 adapted by splitting deposits, fragmenting payments, and rotating corporate skins faster than before. The machine kept humming because the factory was never one thing. It was a workflow that learned. It traded in paper, steel, and code, in gifts and fear, in offshore access and onshore control. It still does. The Macau Nexus, Banco Delta Asia, and the September 2005 shock. While ships moved cargo and handlers counted cash, the dollars needed a doorway. For years, that doorway sat on a quiet street in Macau. Banco Delta Asia wasn't a giant. It didn't need to be. It held something more valuable than size, correspondent access that let a modest balance in Macau echo through New York. To Bureau 39, that was oxygen disguised as routine. On paper, the mechanics looked boring. DPRK-linked trading firms and their proxies opened accounts under bland names, electronics, scrap, textiles. Some brought in bulk deposits. Others received wires from Chinese intermediaries booking advance payments for shipments that wouldn't match later invoices. Compliance elsewhere might have balked. At BDA, according to the U.S. Treasury's September 15, 2005 finding under Section 311 of the USA Patriot Act, red flags were minimized or waved through. The phrasing in Washington was direct, a primary money laundering concern. Macau hummed above this floor. VIP rooms clinked with champagne while couriers counted banknotes. A mid-tier bank in Hong Kong provided the next link, clearing dollars through a larger correspondent in the United States. In Pyongyang, payments appeared as trade. On Bureau 39's ledger, they were lifeblood that wouldn't leave fingerprints on the dear leader's desk. Then the hammer fell. September 15, 2005 wasn't a seizure, it was a signal. Section 311 did something surgical. It warned that touching BDA could threaten your US dollar access. In a reputation-driven system, that was an alarm louder than sirens. Inside BDA, phones lit up. Correspondents backed away. Account holders lined the lobby. The Macau Monetary Authority stepped in to halt a run, and roughly $24 million tied to North Korean-related accounts froze. Small money to a global bank. A gut punch inside Pyongyang's cash calculus. Six-party talks suddenly had a bank as a character. DPRK negotiators treated access to those funds like a loyalty test. Release the money or the conversation stalls. Treasury's answer was the point. Reputational risk can outrank choreography. A single designation had turned a regional lender radioactive, and boards across Asia noticed. Relationship managers who once won arguments started losing to risk committee. Quietly, institutions closed accounts, raised thresholds, and demanded documentation DPRK fronts couldn't provide. A reflex took root. When in doubt, the risk. The number wasn't the story, the chill was. Section 311 worked upstream before dollars fully entered the system. It set off a run not just at a counter, but on a category of risk. Banks learned to scan for patterns named in Treasury's finding, bulk cash accepted without source scrutiny, front companies with generic profiles, tolerance for activity that matched DPRK typologies. Compliance software caught new rules. Analysts built mental ones. Clusters of general trade, firms sharing directors, freight forwarders, or warehouse addresses. Invoices split into suspicious bands. HS codes that hid value in recyclables and industrial fittings. What nobody clocked in the first week was elasticity. Couriers shifted to cash-heavy money service businesses in the Pearl River Delta. A provincial bank in northeast China started receiving wires structured as dozens of small trade payments. Hong Kong shells re-registered under fresh nominees, directors rotated, addresses hopped districts. The door closed, the hallway lengthened. But BDA exposed something Pyongyang couldn't fix with speed. Weaponized reputation turns handshakes into liabilities. For a network built on small hubs and personal ties, that was a structural wound. Microscenes tell the ripple. A Macau teller watched her cousin's job disappear when an MSB folded after correspondents quit. A Chinese broker in Dandong raised fees. Risk now had a price, and everyone downstream would pay it. A North Korean finance officer saw an intermediary bank account closed with no explanation and lost a European supplier. Meanwhile, back offices from Tokyo to Singapore adjusted. Screening rules added telltales. Sudden director changes, nested accounts, trade flows that didn't fit declared business lines. Trade finance desks, once paper-first, asked for vessel histories and AIS integrity checks. Bills of lading alone stopped being magic. Months later, portions of the frozen funds were released under tight conditions. and FinCEN's 2007 final rule locked the fifth special measure against BDA's U.S. correspondent access. Years on, Washington would even withdraw the finding in a technical sense. The reputational scar still stuck. The precedent mattered more than the specific bank. A targeted 311 action could freeze more than funds. It could freeze relationship. You didn't need blanket embargoes to isolate a hub. You needed counterparties to fear the blast radius. The network's counter was segmentation. Rotate shells quarterly, swap banks monthly, spread payments across dozens of invoices priced to jitter within plausible bands. Go yuan first, dollars later. Use barter when paperwork tightened. Add cyber as a buffer, stablecoins through OTC desks when a wire hung in review. Redundancy stopped being a tactic and became doctrine. 2 brokers per corridor, 3 shells per contract, 4 banks per region. BDA didn't end the pipeline from Bureau 39 to dollars. It changed its shape and speed. The corridor that once fit through a lobby in Macau splintered into side streets and back alleys, provincial branches, underground exchangers, phantom cargo, and carefully staged documents. The system adapted around one new rule: reputation is a weapon. Banks learned to wield it. Pyongyang learned to work around it. And somewhere between those lessons, the cost of every shipment, every invoice, and every gift in Pyongyang crept higher, paid by margins, by time, and by people who had to keep saying yes to keep their lives steady. Elastic networks, how the corridors rebuilt overnight. Close one door, build a hallway. That's what happened after September 15, 2005. The need inside Pyongyang didn't shrink. Missile parts, fuel, loyalty gifts, so the system flexed and rerouted in days, not months. Macau went cold. Value slid toward thinner oversight and thicker relationships. Provincial banks in China's northeast became temporary faucets. Underground exchangers in the Pearl River Delta stacked duffel bags of yuan and dollars in back rooms, advancing value on trust and netting ledgers by week's end. Trade became the camouflage of choice. Over-invoicing moved value out. Declare $60,000 worth of polymer scraps as $300,000 and settle the difference as logistics. Under-invoicing hid proceeds. Call a $250,000 cargo of industrial fittings $70,000 and bank the surplus off-book. Phantom shipments finished the set. Documents sailed through customs while cranes never moved. Hong Kong shells ran paper. Singapore shells added polish. A Dalian general trade firm filed HS codes so bland a risk officer needed a microscope to object. It worked because paper matched paper, not because paper matched steel. Couriers adapted too. Bulk cash still crossed borders, but gold coins and luxury watches joined the mix. Dense value, fewer questions. A handler might carry 10 watches through a VIP lane and square a debt by handing them to a broker who wired from a clean account. Gambling junket accounts acted like temporary wallets. Cashier's checks were bought with chopped deposits under thresholds. A single remittance split into dozens of family gifts cleared friction points that used to stop larger wires. Settlement became choreography, many small steps instead of one leap. At sea, ships learned new tricks. Captains cut AIS long enough to slip into a rendezvous zone, then reappeared on shifted course lines. Ship-to-ship transfers moved coal and fuel at night. Bills of lading switched midstream. Flags of convenience reset identities. Rename the hull, repaint, refile under a Marshall Islands company with nominee directors, and yesterday's blacklist entry became tomorrow's clean charter. Transit hubs blended cargo until chemistry lost its voice. On paper, origin migrated to a Russian Far East terminal or a small Chinese port. On a quay, piles mixed until no grab sample could tell a story alone. Costs rose with every pivot. Brokers took fatter cuts. Insurers nudged premiums higher when voyages detoured around stated lanes. A container once costing $2,000 to move now cost $2,350 after routing detours and risk fees. The regime accepted it. Friction is a price, not a stop sign, and streams had multiplied. Coal out, fuel in, labor remittances steady, cyber cash primed to cover surcharges when a bank stalled. The network didn't need every shipment to land. It needed enough to keep hard currency accounts steady. One microscene shows how normal it got. A bank clerk in a provincial Chinese city opens 5 corporate applications, different names, similar seals, same warehouse address. Declared business, general trade, she calls her manager. He shrugs. The firms have tax IDs and references. Accounts open. Months later, those firms settle invoices for textiles that never arrive, then close before anyone asks why the same freight forwarder touched every payment. The paperwork is neat. The pattern is the tell. Unknown to them, across town, an underground exchanger nets positions with a pencil ledger. DPRK, broker A, broker B, fuel. He balances over and under invoice trades so wires don't cross obvious lines. There's no single transfer to trace, just synchronized mispricing tucked inside normal variants. Auditors see noise, the network sees a clearinghouse. It's accounting as a whisper, enough to be heard by those listening for it, inaudible to everyone else. Meanwhile, cyber locked into the rebuild. As banks tighten around physical corridors, operators turn breaches into working capital. Stolen crypto washed through mixers and peel chains, then hit OTC desks in China where tokens turned into yuan by late afternoon. Those yuan grease the same trade-based pipes, pay a freight forwarder, open a new shell, buy a stack of stamps. A drained exchange in March became a recyclables, invoice paid in April from a clean account. Time collapsed from weeks at sea to hours on chain. Regulators adjusted. Banks introduced nested account screening, demanded shipping documents, checked AIS histories, and flagged odd port calls. Analytics firms sold crosswalks linking bills of lading to satellite tracks and customs entries. The network answered with rotation and mimicry. Invoices grew more detailed. Ships spoofed identities with borrowed MMSI numbers and tracks that matched seasonal weather. Middlemen favored sleepy corridors, pulp and paper, scrap metals, low-grade plastics, commodities that ride under the radar until an outlier pops. The goal wasn't invisibility, it was plausibility at scale. Human choices still reset the board. A captain refused a dark transfer near Zhaoshan and radioed a report. Days later, his vessel vanished from public AIS, then reappeared with a new name and fresh paint. Crew lists changed, logs aligned with maintenance. Insurers asked questions, charters shifted to a sister ship. From then on, speed became policy, rotate companies quarterly, change bank accounts monthly, swap SIM cards after every run. De-risking elsewhere fed the shadows. Big banks, spooked by reputational blast radius, dumped entire categories, used cars, scrap, small remitters. Legitimate traders lost accounts. Payments detoured to lightly supervised provincial banks and underground exchangers. Risk didn't vanish, it migrated where controls were thinnest. The network priced that migration and kept moving. If a corridor went loud, value moved to a quieter street 2 cities over. By the end of the first year, corridors looked different. Fewer big wires, more invoice splitting. Fewer obvious shells, more piggybacking on legitimate traders. Fewer Macau-style hubs, more distributed nodes that could be burned and replaced without pain. Cash still mattered. So did paper, steel, and code. The architecture wasn't a single route anymore. It was habits, relationships, and a playbook. Diversify flows, professionalize mispricing, automate rotation, and treat every bank, ship, and shell as disposable. The coal for cash engine, marine tricks, and shadow fleet. Coal out, fuel in, that was the heartbeat after BDA. UN bans wrote no into resolutions, but the sea offered maybe, and maybe funded a government. Brokers stitched routines that looked boring to a port clerk and slippery to anyone who stared too long. The Yellow Sea and East China Sea turned into open-air boardrooms where names, flags, and stories changed with the tide. A standard run began just past midnight off the DPRK coast. A bulker eased off anchor, AIS blinking, then malfunctioning just beyond territorial waters. 30 miles out, a meeting, ship to ship alongside a foreign-flagged vessel with cranes and grabs ready. Coal moved fast, bucket by bucket, aiming for first light as the deadline. By dawn, the receiving ship steamed for a third country port, declaring mixed origin, docking where cargo piles blended until chemistry lost its signature. On paper, origin migrated to a Russian Far East terminal or a small Chinese port fed by rail. The bills of lading matched because they were written to. Identity was a costume. One week, the hull sailed as Hebeng under a flag of convenience. Next week, it reappeared as Emerald Sky, a fresh registry entry and a paint job that covered yesterday's sanctions notice. Ownership lived in a Marshall Islands company owned by another company, controlled by a nominee with a stack of pre-signed forms. Insurance existed, barely. A fringe P&I club emailed a PDF that passed a birth gate, and a charter party layered brokers so the true charterer never spoke to the captain. Transit hubs did the blending. A quiet berth in a Russian harbor took coal that originated inland, then shipped it forward with credible paperwork. Southeast Asian anchorages hosted SDS transfers like clockwork. Tugs shuttled manifests in plastic folders. Fixers arranged warehouse receipts for banks, turning piles into collateral that financed the next loop. Pricing hid value in the margin. Overstated freight charges padded proceeds upstream. Understated coal grades shaved dues downstream. If nobody demanded lab tests, the numbers danced. Captains rehearsed alibis. Weather deviation, equipment failure, fishing nets in the lane. Logs reflected these excuses, time-stamped to match AIS gaps. Crews practiced answers. A chief engineer kept a notebook of outages synchronized with every dark rendezvous. A pilot boat dropped spares and sometimes envelopes just before port calls. Politeness was policy. Silence was profit. Satellites got sharper. Analysts matched draft changes to declared cargo and flagged anomalies. SAR imagery lit up dark hulls on cloudy nights. Compliance teams asked for port state control histories and third-party inspection reports. The network reacted. Rendezvous points slid north and south. AIS spoofing borrowed nearby identities. Handoffs shortened to hours so a single satellite pass missed the moment. When a ship was photographed mid-transfer, sister hulls shifted coordinates by 50 miles and learned new weather scripts. Fuel flowed the other way on the same tricks. Small tankers loitered at agreed coordinates. Hoses snaked across black water. Diesel moved into North Korean receivers labeled fishing support. Public data showed nothing. Back in Nampo, trucks refueled within days. Factories flickered. On paper, no link existed. In practice, every transfer bought another month. Costs rose, insurers added exclusions. Charterers demanded warranties, no DPRK origin. Brokers raised fees when scrutiny climbed. A voyage that once penciled profit at $12 per ton needed $15. The regime paid. Coal stayed a cash printer so long as some shipments cleared the gauntlet and petroleum was oxygen. Margins thinned, volumes adjusted, the ledger still balanced. A micro scene sits on a night deck. A deckhand with a flashlight watches black rock drum steel, the hold swallowing in a rhythm he knows by heart. He thinks about antibiotics his wife needs and a bonus promised if nobody asks questions. The bosun signals, the hose lifts, the hatch closes, the AIS blinks back on. The captain signs a log that says they never stop. Banks struggled with the fog. Trade finance teams saw clean documents, invoice, packing list, bill of lading, and funded letters of credit. Without lab tests or eyewitnesses, paperwork passed. Some banks demanded third-party verifications, vessel audits, AIS integrity checks. Traders pushed back with private lenders and smaller insurers willing to trust neat folders. When large banks risked whole corridors, private houses stepped in, fronted by shells and lawyers who turned control into covenants that never hit a registry. Enforcement scored wins, seizures in third ports, registry strikes, advisories naming SDS hot spots. Each win taught the network. After a seized lot in one port, flows pivoted to a less inquisitive key. When a registry tightened KYC, a more permissive flag expanded capacity overnight. When an advisory listed coordinates, rendezvous shifted to new eddies and higher latitudes where cold decks bought time from inspectors who preferred warmer shifts. Chemistry was the one truth that could ruin a story, so blending became doctrine. Mix lots on shore until a lab-read average rather than signature. Call it recyclables or low-grade aggregates to dull attention. If inspection became unavoidable, delay with a missing stamp, then load at midnight. If forced to abandon a cargo, burn the shell, move the manager 2 layers deeper, and relaunch under a new file. In the end, the ocean didn't launder guilt, it laundered doubt. That was enough. Coal became dollars because ships met quietly, paperwork agreed with itself, and each person along the chain, captain, clerk, broker, underwriter, chose the explanation that kept business moving. The shadow fleet didn't need to be perfect. It needed to be plausible, fast, and replaceable. And it was. Cyber as a revenue arm, from bank heists to crypto drains. While coal moved at night, another crew worked in daylight hours that nobody watched, operators who learned that a well-timed fish could move more money in minutes than a bulker could in weeks. Their first big lesson came on a Friday in Dhaka. A printer at Bangladesh Bank jammed. Swift confirmations didn't roll. By the time anyone checked a dusty room, fraudulent transfer orders had already flown through correspondent banks toward Manila. A single misspelling of foundation stopped part of the haul. The rest showed how bank plumbing could be gamed with social engineering, patient reconnaissance, and a burst of precisely crafted wire requests. Then crypto changed the tempo. Exchanges grew faster than their security models. Bridges moved assets like highways without toll booths. In March 2022, attackers compromised validator keys on the Ronin Bridge tied to Axie Infinity, approving 2 withdrawals that drained roughly $625 million in ETH and USDC. U.S. authorities later attributed the exploit to North Korea, linked actors, and sanctioned the receiving wallet. On-chain analysts traced peeled chains as funds split into thousands of hops before sliding into mixers. Transparency mapped the route. It didn't slow the getaway. And the hits kept coming. In June 2023, attackers looted Atomic Wallet users for roughly $100 million. By February 2025, a breach tied to Bybit saw about $1.5 billion in crypto move in hours, proof that speed and scale now travel together. Phishing was the front door. A developer opened a fake job offer PDF. A contractor installed a vendor tool that was a backdoor. A treasurer logged into a cloned admin page. Once inside, operators sat quietly, reading withdrawal limits, approval flows, and alert thresholds. They moved when defenses were thin, early mornings, weekends, holidays, stacking withdrawals just below internal tripwires. 1 hour could turn into tens of millions if signatures aligned and security teams were off shift. Mixers turned theft into fog. Services pooled tainted tokens, scrambled flows, and returned them as statistically blurred outputs. Sanctions later hit some of those mixers, but clones reappeared with familiar code and fresh domains. One of the most prominent, Tornado Cash, processed more than $7 billion in laundered value before Sanctions spotlighted its role. Laundering ran across chains, ETH to BTC to privacy coins, then back into stablecoins to steady value. The exits were off-chain. OTC brokers in China who paid yuan for a discount, small exchanges with thin KYC, casinos that cycled deposits as winnings, and merchants willing to take tokens for inventory and settle with importers through offset invoices. At each step, a sliver was shaved. Speed made up for margin. Not every haul stayed on-chain. Bank heists didn't end with DACA. Smaller institutions with outdated remote access tools fell to spear phish campaigns that read like HR memos. Once credentials were in hand, transfers flowed into nested accounts inside Correspondent chains Bureau 39 could no longer touch openly. The conversion point was the same. OTC cash desks and brokers who specialized in moving value across borders under trade paperwork that matched because it was designed to match. Proceeds greased the physical machine. Crypto cash outs covered premium surcharges when a shadow fleet insurer demanded more to gloss a risky voyage. They paid for incorporation packages, nominees, addresses, bank introductions for the next general trade skins. They funded apartments, phones, and deposits for overseas labor teams whose remittances would be skimmed upstream. Cyber wasn't a replacement for coal or labor. It was a reserve line that bridged shocks when a bank froze a wire or a port got spooked by an advisory. Defenders adapted. Exchanges enforced multi-sig approvals, withdrawal time locks, and behavioral analytics that paused unusual movements. Chain analysis firms flagged addresses tied to prior exploits. Law enforcement coordinated seizures with venues that could act fast. After Ronin, public reports noted tens of millions clawed back with partner help. Each success came down to minutes. The gap between the first mixer hop and a freeze order that landed in the right inbox before a sleepy weekend desk went home. The cat and mouse matured. Attackers swapped infrastructure constantly, fresh domains, new command and control servers, clean cloud accounts. They avoided US venues when they could, split flows below compliance thresholds, and favored desks that paid by evening. A whiteboard in an ops room might show 3 columns, targets, mixers, exits, and a rule at the top: never reuse anything. Targets rotated from exchanges and bridges to wallet as a service providers, liquidity routers, and payment aggregators. The more the industry plugged holes in one pool, the more these operators went for the plumbing. Human moments anchor the story. A startup founder watched a wallet drain and understood payroll just vanished. A compliance analyst in Seoul stared at a swirl of red nodes on a tracer's screen and found the one counterparty likely to cooperate before the weekend. A North Korean operator leaned back as a peeled chain completed, knowing a quota just moved toward a bonus that might shift his family's apartment. Everyone in that chain worked the clock. Cash out remained the choke point. When exchanges, analytics firms, and banks moved in sync, recoveries landed. When a small desk blinked, millions cleared. Over time, Sanctions pushed some mixers offline and pressured OTC brokers. The network responded by fragmenting flows, hopping chains faster, and cashing out through merchants whose business models made split settlements look normal. Gift card ecosystems and gaming payouts, places where lots of small disbursements don't look strange, became side exits when bigger venues tightened. Two truths held. Cyber heists compress time, minutes instead of months, and every dollar still has to touch an off-ramp that a human controls. That's where precision bites hardest. Freeze the right address fast, lean on the right desk, and months of prep evaporate. Miss by a weekend, and a year of compliance work ends up as a tidy invoice labeled recyclables. Settled from a clean account, stacked neatly in a folder that would pass any glance not designed to see through it. Western gateways, correspondent banking, loopholes, and willful blindness. All that value, coal margins, crypto cash-outs, skimmed remittances, still had to turn into dollars someone would accept for precision parts or loyalty gifts. The trick never started at a skyscraper. It started at a modest bank where paperwork smiled. A Dalian front called Everise General Trade opened an account with a rented office, nominee directors, and supplier references arranged by the same fixer who filed the incorporation. The branch manager liked steady deposit. Compliance had one analyst for 100 alerts. That was enough to open the door. Correspondent banking did the rest. The small bank held a relationship with a mid-tier institution offshore. That mid-tier cleared through a U.S. giant. Once a payment entered that chain, the dollar system treated it like any other trade settlement. The U.S. clearer saw flows from a trusted correspondent, not from Everise 3 hops down. Nested accounts hid origins. Each hop diluted signal. Everyone trusted someone else's controls. Paperwork made it look clean. Trade finance funds documents, not cargo holds. A neat stack, invoice, packing list, bill of lading, 1 letters of credit, and open account finance. If the cargo was mispriced, misdescribed, or imaginary, the documents still synchronized. Over-invoicing carried value out. Declare $65,000 of polymer scraps as $310,000 and bury the difference in freight and quality adjustments. Under-invoicing hid profits. Sell $240,000 of industrial fittings for $72,000 and let the surplus disappear off book. Phantom shipments filled gaps, documents sailed, cranes never moved. Relationship managers fought for clients. Risk teams fought the blast radius. September 15, 2005 rewired the argument. After Treasury labeled Banco Delta Asia a primary money laundering concern under Section 311, boards learned a reputational strike could snap correspondent lines overnight. Risk committees gained veto power. Transaction monitoring tuned for trade-based typologies. Repeated counterparties in odd corridors, HS codes that hide value, recyclables, scrap polymers. Invoice values that jittered inside suspicious bands and clusters of general trade firms sharing directors, freight forwarders, IP logins, and warehouse addresses. But blind spots lingered. Beneficial ownership registries, where they existed, recorded equity, not control lodged in covenants, pledges, and call options that let a lender replace a board without holding shares. Trust and company service providers sold turnkey opacity. Nominee directors by the dozen, mail drop addresses, and bank introductions that comforted overworked analysts. Lawyers created orphan, special purpose vehicles and drafted interlocks that transferred control on default. Everyone ticked boxes. Nobody saw the whole network. A micro scene plays in a glassed conference room. A junior analyst maps 6 clients labeled general trade. Different names, same courier address, same freight forwarder, 3 overlapping directors. She escalates. Her manager asks for more documents. The client produces stamped inspection certificates from a firm that never inspects anything and port photos with metadata that won't match the key if anyone checks. The alert closes. Insufficient evidence. Months later, an exam team asks why the pattern hid in plain sight. Correspondent agreements started to grow teeth. U.S. clearers pressed mid-tiers. Show us your look-throughs on high-risk corridors. Mid-tiers pressed small banks. Prove beneficial ownership, vessel histories, AIS integrity, and independent surveyor reports with verifiable metadata. Some banks tied discounts to verification. Faster funding when third-party labs sampled recyclables. Lower premiums when AIS showed tamper-proof logs and draft changes matched declared weight. Honest traders moved faster. Fog slowed. De-risking cut both ways. Big banks dumped entire categories, used cars, scrap, small remitters, because the noise crushed margin. Legitimate firms lost accounts and slid to provincial banks with thin controls or to underground exchangers with no recourse. Risk didn't vanish. It migrated to weaker breaks where DPRK fronts could blend with frustrated, clean businesses. Fees rose, delays lengthened. Your wire sat in pending because the system couldn't separate fog from rain. Precision made a dent when it targeted hinges. Freight forwarders filing the same HS codes for a district of clients. Trust and company service providers minting shells for known proxies. OTC desks that turn tainted tokens into yuan by dinner time lean on those, and 3 corridors seize without touching cranes. When an advisory named ship-to-ship hotspots and a registry tightened checks, banks added vessel risk screens to trade finance. If a ship's draft didn't fit declared cargo, or a maintenance outage matched a dark transfer zone, funding paused before steel moved. Human incentives still warped outcomes. Relationship managers booked bonuses on balances, not on suspicious activity reports. Trade finance teams measured turnaround time, not anomaly detection. A memo floated through an inbox. We can't clear dollars without trust. Trust is the attack surface. It read like philosophy. It was a KPI problem. A banker's quiet win shows the fix. She reviews a letter of credit for industrial recyclables. The counterparty's director appears on 4 firms tied to a flagged broker. The vessel's AIS shows a 3-hour gap near a listed coordinate. The inspection certificate's metadata says a different warehouse. She declines. The client threatens to move business. The bank holds. 2 weeks later, a seizure hits a neighboring port for the same commodity, same forwarder, same pattern. Her case becomes training, and her team gets time. The lesson that stuck after Macau wasn't never touch risk. It was verify control and steal. Paper can be perfect and still be a lie. If you want clean pipes, reward saying yes fast when evidence is real, and pay people to say no when the story doesn't add up, no matter how neat the stamps look. China's ambiguous role: buffer, broker, backdoor. While risk teams in New York rewired controls and Macau went cold, leverage lived across a narrow river. China wasn't one thing in this story. It was shock absorber, marketplace, and corridor, stabilizing a volatile neighbor while letting commerce breathe through gaps that opened and closed with politics. Beijing voted for UN resolutions. Along the Yalu, practice moved to a different rhythm. The stakes were blunt. A sudden North Korean collapse meant refugees crossing in waves, military uncertainty on China's doorstep, and factories in the northeast losing cheap inputs and steady buyers. Stability topped purity. Policy pulsed, tight after missile tests, looser when winter bit or growth targets slipped. The signal to provincial cadres was mixed. Enforce sanctions, yes, but don't choke your numbers. Promotions ride performance. Trade found space in that ambiguity. Dandong told the tale in invoices. Warehouses logged goods China origin. Trucks rolled over bridges under tarps that never lifted. Brokers ran noodle shops in front and letter of credit desks in back. They advanced cash at a mine gate, routed contracts through Chinese-registered partners, and produced paperwork that turned cross-border barter into domestic trade. Yuan liquidity flowed through small banks where branch managers knew best customers by nickname, not by beneficial ownership chart. These middlemen weren't a national policy. They were the grease. A broker financed a coal lot, secured repayment in seafood or timber, then balanced accounts with over- and under-invoicing so values netted out without obvious wires. Settlements stayed in yuan to dodge the glare of dollars. If a client needed euros later, the broker swapped through offshore accounts or leaned on an underground bank that netted positions across city. When scrutiny rose, barter took the lead. Machinery parts for copper wire, medicine for lumber, values penciled on ledger paper and squared with extra crates when prices drifted. Enforcement varied by postcode. One county checked cargoes, audited AIS pings near Liaoning's coast, and bled networks with document demands. Next door, a phone call waved trucks through. Incentives wrote the gap. Border towns depended on cross-river trade to hit targets. Managed leakage became the compromise, enough pressure to show alignment, enough tolerance to keep the frontier calm. Diplomacy layered over commerce. Beijing backed bans on coal, labor, and refined petroleum, then interpreted them in the gray. Quotas, carve-outs, and quiet pauses let stockpiles drain or contracts finish under new labels. Publicly, officials called for restraint. Privately, they let the system breathe, push, release, tighten, then ease. It wasn't sabotage, it was balance. On the ground, people priced risk daily. A Dandong trader kept 2 phones, family on one, clients on the other speaking in code about plastics that weren't plastics. He knew which customs officer preferred which cigarettes, which bank teller processed same-day credits, which truckers kept their mouths shut. Twice he'd been told to slow down. He didn't. His cousins lived on the cash. His clients were connected enough to make small problems dissolve if he stayed useful. Across the river, a North Korean manager slept in a warehouse office, calling home weekly to report remittances to a handler who logged every yuan against a quota that never dropped. When a crackdown hit, labels changed. Workers became trainees, vendors became cultural partners, exports became domestic resale. Flows dipped, then resumed. The ledger at headquarters didn't care about weather or headlines. Quotas always rose. Yuan corridors mattered more after September 2005. With direct dollar clearing riskier, fronts leaned into Chinese currency, converting later through layered trades. A textile export at an inflated price carried value into a foreign account. A scrap metal import underpriced profits into invisibility. Chinese companies, some complicit, many not, became the faces of logistics chains that ended in DPRK-controlled books. When a crack appeared, names rotated, tax IDs refreshed, and routine reset. Beijing's wider calculus included other sanctioned theaters. Evasion services, fringe registries, gray insurers, parts dealers expanded to serve Russia and Iran after 2022. North Korean operators learned from that market and sometimes shared nodes. A tanker doing a discrete run for one client could quietly serve another. Overlap made detection harder and denial easier. Push on one network and two more flexed. Crackdowns came in bursts. A sweep closed exchange houses, a provincial bank replaced managers, headlines praised seizures, trade dipped, then slid sideways through adjacent channels. One shop shuttered, two reopened with new signs. Families in border cities felt it first. Rent bounced, rice prices shifted, and parents told kids not to ask where uncles worked now. Quiet adjustments kept tempers down and metrics up. There's a human ledger under every policy shift. A woman on the Chinese side sorted seafood packed by North Korean students, her plant's payroll routed through a DPRK contractor with a local license. On paper, stipends, in life, wages skimmed upstream. A trucker counted on weekly crossings to keep a loan current. When the bridge slowed, he idled and borrowed from the same broker who took his next job's margin. Sanctions became interest rates in people's kitchen. From Pyongyang's view, China's ambiguity was capital, an asset buying time and optionality. From Beijing's view, it was leverage, tightened to send a message in talks elsewhere, loosened to keep the frontier quiet when growth sagged. On paper, the border honored resolutions. In practice, it flexed with seasons, politics, and the needs of two systems that prefer managed risk to uncontrolled shock. The result was a buffer that softened blows, a broker that stitched deals, and a backdoor that never fully closed. For the money machine, that ambiguity functioned like infrastructure. Habits, relationships, and incentives that let value cross a narrow river into a wide economy without leaving fingerprints anyone wanted to see. Exported labor, cash from sweat and control. While yuan corridors kept goods moving, another artery delivered hard currency on a schedule. North Koreans sent abroad to work under watch. It looked orderly on paper: training, cultural exchange, skills transfer. In life, it was control with a ledger. The state signed contracts, the host firms paid a DPRK-linked intermediary, and most of each wage never touched the worker's hand. Deployments followed familiar lines. Construction crews poured concrete in Russia's Far East through winters that froze scaffolds solid. Logging teams cut Siberian timber miles from towns, their passports locked in drawers they couldn't open. Along the Chinese border, factory shifts processed seafood, stitched textiles, and assembled simple electronics under contracts routed through Chinese-registered partners that traced back across the river. Smaller contingents appeared on Gulf worksites or African projects, folded into subcontract chains that hid origins behind local firms with tidy paperwork and polite reception desks. Dormitories carried the rules, headcounts morning and night, curfews set by supervisors who held phones and keys, movement logged, calls rationed, emergency care authorized by a handler who weighed cost against quotas. Wages didn't arrive in envelopes. Host firms paid a DPRK trading company or its local proxy. The intermediary deducted loyalty contributions, dorm fees, and organizational maintenance. Human rights reporting and defector accounts describe the split in stark terms. Workers kept a sliver, the state captured most. Families back home waited for remittances posted in a ledger they didn't control. When UN resolutions targeted overseas labor, labels changed, not the practice. Workers became students and trainees. Contracts cited curricula and skills modules, while crews tied rebar and wired lights. Inspections saw tidy classrooms and printed schedules pinned to walls. The extraction continued behind documents that felt correct to an overworked official scanning stamp. A microscene sits in a prefab canteen near Vladivostok. A man counts silently between spoonfuls of thin soup. The apartment his wife was promised if quotas were met, school fees due in spring, the brand of cigarettes his supervisor favors. He signs up for overtime when a site manager offers extra hours, not because it lands in his pocket, but because higher totals reduce questions later. A creased photo lives in a passport he isn't allowed to hold. He knows the morning count will start a call chain if he's missing. That call reaches his family before he does. On the Chinese frontier, a woman debones fish in a chilled room, fingers nicked, eyes down when a local inspector passes. Payroll flows through a contractor legally registered in China, controlled by a DPRK manager. The factory's books show market rate labor costs. Her remittance list shows deductions, collective support, solidarity fee, facility upkeep. She signs a form confirming pride in overseas patriotic work, then checks a balance that buys rice and oil if nothing else breaks at home. Control traveled with small comforts and sharp warnings. Supervisors held passports, visas, and mobile SIMs. Access to phones and better rations could appear as rewards after a month with no discipline notes. A rumor of someone who ran and triggered reprisals at home kept people in beds at night. Quotas didn't ebb with seasons, they rose. If the site slipped behind, the dorm heard about it before dawn. Crackdowns came in pulses. Regional sweeps repatriated some crews. Months later, training centers reopened with fresh paperwork in another district. In Russia, public statements in 2023 and 2024 from local officials described interest in thousands of North Korean workers for construction and logging. Mechanisms looked familiar, student and cultural visas that fit the letter of rules while honoring the pace of build schedule. Gross pay might be listed in hundreds of dollars a month. Net retained by workers fell much lower after deductions. The host saw steady crews and simple billing. Pyongyang saw quotas ticked in hard currency. This stream fit the machine because it was predictable. One transfer settled dozens of wages. One handler reconciled a dorm's remittances and sent totals up the chain. The money arrived clean enough for small banks and brokers to fold into broader trades. If a corridor tightened, labels shifted. If a dorm emptied, a new exchange program opened with the same bunk beds and a different sign over the door. A quiet moment lands at a border dormitory. A worker steps into winter air, the river a dark band he could cross in minutes. He doesn't move. He knows what the morning count triggers and how fast a note can travel back home. He finishes a cigarette, presses it flat on a railing, and returns upstairs. Control isn't just walls and keys. It's paperwork, quotas, and a promise that the next remittance, the one his family needs to buy rice this week, depends on him being in that bed when the handle turns. Luxury loops. How the elite shop under sanctions. Coal pays quotas, labor fills ledgers, but loyalty runs on leather, horsepower, and labels. In Pyongyang, status is a visible script. Mercedes sedans idling at party compounds, Swiss watches flashed at banquets, French cognac poured in rooms where electricity never goes out. Sanctions turned those objects into governance. The network learned to source them like any other commodity, through distance, disguise, and paperwork that passes a glance. The wish list rarely changes. German sedans and Japanese SUVs, Swiss watches and European optics, French cognac, Scotch whiskey, Italian handbags, top-shelf cosmetics and electronics, even ski lifts and snowmobiles for showcase resorts. UN rules ban luxury categories, vehicles above engine thresholds, premium timepieces, high-end spirits, and list obvious items. The answer isn't to break the rule, it's to bend the story. Parts, not products. Used, not new. Gifts, not sales. Distance comes first. A third-country wholesaler never sells to North Korea. It supplies a distributor in a permissive market with an invoice that reads regional stock. The buyer is Pacific Household Goods or Golden Shine Trading, a shell incorporated by a service firm that packages nominee directors, mail drop addresses, and bank introductions. Product codes say auto components, kitchenware, sporting equipment. In crates, an S-Class engine block, luxury car infotainment systems, bindings and skis bound for a mountain that wasn't supposed to exist, and cases of top-shelf liquor. Diplomats smooth what freight can't. A consular car crosses a land border with sealed boxes marked official materials. A pouch moves through an airport VIP lane. For volume, shells carry the risk. A Hong Kong entity leases a warehouse 2 cities from the port. A Singapore financier issues letters of credit for durables, backed by funds routed through brokers who wash provenance with layered invoices that match because they were written to match. When someone finally inspects paper, everything aligned. Payment mirrors the larger machine. Cash settles deals in back offices when trust is high. Gold coins and luxury watches serve as chips in private rooms where exchange rates don't need words. Crypto fills gaps. An OTC broker takes tokens laundered through mixers and pays yuan domestically, then advances dollars offshore from a clean account. In a bank's files, a home goods importer pays a wholesaler. In life, a handler in Pyongyang logs who gets which keys and who earns which bottle. Gifts become discipline. A colonel who hits quotas receives a sedan with plates that open lanes. A provincial party chief gets a watch whose model number says more than any speech. A donju who moved money fast gets a voucher for a boutique that stocks labels the masses only see on billboards. In a state that rations everything, indulgence is a contract. Behave and the catalog stays open. Retail is theater. Department stores in Pyongyang stack glass cases with cosmetics and handbags, prices quoted in crisp dollars. Defectors and visiting diplomats have described customers peeling off hundreds for goods that equal a year's wage. The message is simple. Scarcity is for other people. The loyalty economy runs on optics. Enforcement bites, then gets gamed. Seizures catch misdeclared liquor in Rotterdam. High-end cars labeled used get stopped in ports from Europe to Southeast Asia. The network pivots. Next shipments arrive as disassembled kits, chassis declared as industrial machinery, electronics as spares. Mechanics reassemble behind closed doors. Finished cars never cross a border on paper. Watches shift to models invoiced under listed price caps. Vehicles get declared as older trims just below engine thresholds. If a lane heats up, the route tilts. Laos to China to the river one season, the Gulf to Russia's far east to a railhead the next. A micro scene plays in a southern Chinese office. A middleman lays out 3 stamped invoices, sporting goods, optical instruments, kitchen appliances. The boxes hold skis for a showpiece resort, civilian-grade night vision, and designer cookware destined for a minister's new apartment. He schedules payments in a chat app, confirms a container number, and pockets a fee. He's thinking tuition, not geopolitics. Everything turns on settlement. 1 week, mispriced textiles absorb value that resurfaces to pay a luxury invoice. The next, stablecoins cover a gap when a bank delays a transfer. An embassy account closes a bulk order with cultural exchange funds. Every route costs more after a seizure. Each survives because the premium is the price of power. There's a sharp irony. A regime that rails against decadence depends on it to hold the center. Sanctions tried to starve the loop. They made it prestigious. A tower lights up with imported fixtures. A convoy slips past ration lines, and the catalog for the few stays open even when the market for the many is closed. The date that matters, September 15, 2005 revisited. Returned to the instant the wire went quiet. September 15, 2005 wasn't a raid, it was a reputational strike. In Washington, Treasury invoked Section 311 of the USA Patriot Act and labeled Banco Delta Asia a primary money laundering concern. In Macau, account managers watched correspondents pull back like a tide. In Pyongyang, phones lit up. Roughly $24 million tied to North Korean-related accounts froze as the Macau Monetary Authority stepped in to stop a run. The number was small. The signal was huge. Inside negotiation rooms, the bank became a character. 6-party talks had their own script. Suddenly, access to BDA's funds turned into a litmus test. Release them or progress stalls. Treasury's answer was the hinge. Reputational risk outranks choreography. A single finding could chill a region. Boards learned that a boutique lender 2 handshakes from New York could go radioactive overnight, and any relationship inside the blast radius could cost a franchise its dollar lifeline. The designation exposed structure. DPRK Finance didn't lean on giant institutions. It leaned on nimble hubs, Macau-sized, relationship-driven, close enough to grease edges, distant enough to look ordinary. Section 311 turned those handshakes into liabilities. Mid-tier correspondents questioned downstream screening. U.S. clearers asked who sat at the far end of payment chain. Relationship managers, used to winning arguments on revenue, started losing to risk committees armed with a new vocabulary. Correspondent exposure, nested accounts, typologies. The chill traveled faster than any subpoena. Regional banks quietly closed accounts that fit patterns Treasury flagged. Bulk cash accepted without source scrutiny, front companies with generic profiles, clusters of general trade firms sharing directors, freight forwarders, or warehouse addresses. Trade finance desks began asking for vessel histories and AIS integrity instead of trusting perfect bills of lading. Compliance tools added rules. Analysts added instinct. The lesson hardened. Paper can be perfect and still be wrong. Pyongyang adapted with speed and segmentation. Deposits split across provincial banks. Payments fractured into smaller invoices priced to jitter inside plausible bands. Shells rotated quarterly. Nominees churned. Addresses hopped. Flows went yuan first, dollars later. Barter filled gaps when banks hesitated. Machinery for metals, pharmaceuticals for timber, values netted through mispricing. Cyber shifted from side hustle to strategy. Exploits at exchanges, bridges, and wallet providers converted code into cash outside correspondent chains that now burned at a touch. Microstories marked the bend. A Macau teller watched her cousin's job disappear when a money service business lost its correspondent and folded. A North Korean finance officer saw a European supplier freeze a shipment after his intermediary bank account closed without explanation. A junior banker in Shenzhen escalated a map linking 6 general trade clients through the same courier address and freight forwarder. The file drew a new response: decline, document, and brace for fallout. Reputation had become a control surface. Months later, portions of the frozen funds were released under conditions, and in 2007, FinCEN finalized the 5th special measure: no U.S. correspondence for BDA. Years on, FinCEN would withdraw the finding in a technical sense. By then, the precedent had etched itself into muscle memory. Section 311 didn't need to seize assets to rearrange risk. It needed counterparties to fear contagion. Banks recalibrated appetites. Examiners arrived with lists of typologies. Insurers repriced voyages that touched gray registries. Freight forwarders learned that HS codes like recyclables, polymers, and industrial fittings could trigger call. For Pyongyang, the message cut both ways. The United States could project financial power upstream with a press release and a rule, and the network had to be redundant, modular, and fast: 2 brokers per corridor, 3 shells per contract, 4 banks per region. After September 15, 2005, redundancy wasn't clever, it was survival math. Every corridor needed a warmed backup. Every payment needed an alibi. Every ship needed a second name waiting in paint. A deeper shift landed in culture. Compliance desks gained budget and veto power. Correspondent agreements grew teeth, periodic look-throughs on high-risk corridors, vessel risk screens tied to trade finance, independent surveyor photos with verifiable metadata. Honest traders got discounts for verification. Fog slowed. De-risking pushed legitimate businesses towards smaller banks and underground exchangers, where controls were thin and DPRK proxies blended with frustrated, clean firms. Risk migrated. It didn't vanish. The pipeline didn't die on that Thursday. It splintered. The corridor that once fit through a lobby in Macau broke into side streets, provincial branches, underground exchangers, phantom cargo, and on-chain exits. Costs rose, margins thinned. The machine kept breathing because it learned a new rule: trust is leverage. You can earn it, rent it, or lose it in a paragraph. And once it's gone, the price of every dollar goes up for everyone, on decks, on desks, and in the quiet rooms where approvals turn into lifelines. The adaptation curve. From shock to systematized evasion. Once burned, they stopped trusting luck. The BDA shock taught Pyongyang that improvisation wouldn't cut it. Evasion had to be engineered like a product. The fix wasn't a single masterstroke. It was layers, shells within shells, ships within fleets, payments within payments, each designed to fail safely so the system kept breathing when one piece snapped. Corporate skins stopped being one-offs and became inventory. Service providers in Hong Kong and beyond sold packages: incorporation, nominee directors, bank introductions, trade document templates, and continuity plans for account closures. A Dandong trading house spun up siblings by the dozen, same phones, different names, rotating addresses, so a shutdown felt like pruning, not amputation. Directors changed quarterly. seals lived in one drawer. When banks pushed for beneficial owners, control slipped into trusts and fiduciaries who produced certified copies no analyst could pierce fast. Shipping turned into choreography. Managers kept spreadsheets of vessel identities, current name, prior name, MMSI histories, flag, P&I status, burn score. When a hull's profile got hot, flag queries, port delays, AIS anomalies noted by insurers, it rotated out, reflagged, repainted, and returned with a fresh file. Sister ships mirrored patterns just enough to trick models, then diverged to reset risk score. Dark transfers shortened, rendezvous points shifted on a 60-day clock, seasonally tuned whether scripts matched alibis to local wind data. Captains carried laminated cue cards. Polite, consistent practice. Money moved through nested corridors by design. Correspondent chains diluted signal, small bank to mid-tier, each hop blurring origins. Payments split into tranches below thresholds that trigger enhanced review. Invoice values jittered inside plausible bands to dodge rules keyed to repetition. Trade-based laundering got professionalized. Freight forwarders cataloged HS codes with low scrutiny, recyclables, scrap metals, polymers, and coached clients to describe goods so inspectors shrugged. Over and under invoicing synced across counterparties, netting values without wires crossing obvious lines. Phantom shipments filled gaps with paper that synchronized because it was written to synchronize. Cyber became standing reserve. Stolen tokens weren't dumped, they queued for exits mapped to concrete needs. Need yuan by evening in a provincial hub, an OTC desk buys at a discount and pays cash. Need euros for precision components. A broker wires from a clean account after receiving stablecoins laundered through mixers and chain hops. A whiteboard rule governed everything. Rotate infrastructure, rotate exits, never reuse keys, avoid US-touching venues when a substitute exists. Bridges hardened, wallet-as-a-service providers took their place as targets. The industry plugged pool leaks, these operators went for the plumbing. Compliance countermeasures forced upgrades, not retreat. Banks started auditing AIS against trade finance. The network answered with spoof tracks stitched to doctored port logs and draft readings that matched declared weights. Analytics linked shells by shared directors and addresses. Incorporators diversified to unique nominees recruited online with separate trail. Beneficial ownership registries came online. Controls slid into contracts, pledges, call options, and covenants that let a lender replace boards without owning equity. Lawyers wrote interlocks that lived in drawers, not registries, and produced opinion letters when a relationship manager needed reassurance. Costs rose and the machine paid them. Brokers took fatter cuts. Insurance premiums jumped for voyages with operational anomalies. Lawyers billed for complexity, layered covenants that passed diligence while masking control. Those costs flowed downstream, freight surcharges at checkout, wider FX spreads on your transfer, longer lead times for parts. Upstream, they acted like tuition. Every dollar bought a lesson about which corridors flagged, which didn't, and why. Human moments sharpened the edges. A compliance officer at a regional bank mapped a dozen general trade clients through shared IP logins and courier addresses. She froze accounts. The next week she resigned, worn down by a year of pushing against revenue targets. Across the sea, a captain refused to go dark near Jeju, citing safety and law. His name vanished from the next crew list. The log later showed a maintenance outage, timed to the transfer he wouldn't make. Risk moved. People paid for the movement. Detection hit limits. Satellites caught more ship-to-ship transfers, but proving origin required more than imagery. Blockchain tracing mapped peel chains. Seizures needed timing and cooperation across weekends and holidays. Trade finance still funded documents, not hatches. The network exploited the delta between what systems could see and what people could stage. A warehouse inspection found neat stacks of plastics. A lab test, never ordered, would have found coal dust. Redundancy became doctrine. Every function had backups, 2 brokers per corridor, 3 shells per contract, 4 banks per region. When an advisory named a freight forwarder, business didn't scramble. It slid to a warmed substitute with a spotless file. When a registry tightened checks, a looser one expanded capacity overnight. When an exchange blacklisted an address, swaps bounced through a DEX for 2 hops, then landed at a small venue on a holiday weekend. Dwell time compressed. Rotation. Schedules moved from calendars to timers. This wasn't sophistication for show. It was survival math. Precision strikes land once. Resiliency wins the season. The network learned to outlast audits, to trade speed for deniability when needed, and to hire professional launderers who treat risk like inventory, price inputs, model outputs, allocate capital, and retire assets before they burn. That's the curve, shock, adjustment system, and once a system settles, others copy it, slotting their motives into a chassis built to survive. The copycats and the marketplace of evasion. Once Pyongyang proved the chassis, others bolted on their engines. Techniques that survived September 15, 2005 didn't stay local, they turned into services. In freight offices from Dubai to Dalian, you could now buy mispricing as a package, gray insurance as a PDF, and a shell company with 6 months of history by afternoon. Iran leaned into petrochemicals with paper that said solvents, tankers that carried condensate, and invoices that hid value in quality adjustments. Russia, hit by 2022 sanctions, stood up a shadow fleet at speed, aging tankers bought through layered trusts, reflagged overnight, and insured by thin clubs that sent certificates before they answered phones. Flags of convenience offered fast lanes. Registry agents sold new names like license plate. On land, opacity became a marketplace. Trust and company service providers pitched global structures, nominees, orphan SPVs, mail drops that survived KYC and continuity kits, pre-signed resignations, backdated leases, rotating directors on a calendar. Freight forwarders curated HS codes that sailed past sleepy desks, scrap metals, pulp, polymers, industrial fitting. They coached clients to jitter invoice values inside plausible bands, so algorithmic monitors saw randomness instead of pattern. Crypto shifted from frontier to utility. Mixers that once washed niche flows became industrial laundries. When one got sanctioned, clones popped up running familiar code on new domains. OTC brokers posted rates on encrypted channels. Same-day yuan in Shenzhen, rubles in Vladivostok, dollars in Dubai, discounts for tainted tokens that needed quick exits. Casinos and gaming platforms offered side doors, small, constant payouts that looked like normal churn. Gift card ecosystems and e-commerce wallets became settlement rails where lots of micro-exits didn't raise eyebrows. Every enforcement move taught the market. A Section 311 action spooked correspondence. Therefore, payments split into dozens of sub-threshold wires routed through provincial nodes with thin compliance. A maritime advisory named ship-to-ship hot spots. Therefore, tankers shifted to colder water, spoofed tracks to mirror local fishing rhythms, and cut transfer windows to minutes. A blacklist burned a shell. Therefore, incorporators rolled out a warmed successor with a clean tax ID and a new nominee who'd never shared a phone number with anyone in the file. Professional launderers turned playbooks into products. Network maps linked freight forwarders, registries, and insurers into triangles that moved goods, paper, and risk together. Trade-based money laundering matured into a portfolio. Over-invoice here, under-invoice there, phantom shipment to balance, netted across 3 jurisdictions so no single ledger held the lie end-to-end. Auditors saw tidy files. Models saw noise that looked like randomness. The profit lived in the delta between what systems could check and what people didn't have time to verify. Overlap made detection harder. A bulker that once moved North Korean coal under recyclables could haul sanctioned crude a season later under a new name. The registry clerk changed a line, the ship changed its face. A freight forwarder who filed HS codes for 100 general trade, clients served 1 sanctioned network and 20 clean ones. Squeezed too hard and you punish the innocent alongside the guilty. Risk priced this ambiguity. Everyone paid a little extra to keep pipes open. Legitimate trade felt the drag. Banks de-risked used cars, scrap, and small remitters. Honest importers lost accounts and moved to smaller lenders with higher fees and slower clocks. Letters of credit that cleared in a day took a week while someone pulled AIS histories and surveyor photos with verifiable metadata. Inventory swelled to buffer delays, financing costs climbed. You saw it as a processing fee, a fuel surcharge, a seasonal premium. It was the fog tack. Precision hurt where it mattered. Target a freight forwarder filing 90% of a district's polymers and 3 lanes seas without touching a port crane. Sanction OTC desks that turn tainted tokens into yuan by dinner time and cash out windows narrow just as a shipment needs paying. Push registry agents to verify beneficial ownership and control rights, pledges, call options, covenants, and shell rotation slows because lies carry personal risk. Tie premium discounts to verified cargo audits and AIS integrity checks with tamper-proof logs. And gray voyages bleed margin while clean shippers move faster. But the marketplace adapts. When insurers demand lab tests on recyclables, mixers of coal dust get finer. When banks want vessel risk scores, AIS forgery tools get better at mimicking weather and tug patterns. When exchanges enforce travel rule data, exits move to merchants who accept stablecoins and settle with importers through offset invoices that never touch a correspondent chain. Kitchen table scene shows the spillover. An auto parts importer in Accra renews his line. His bank exits the corridor. He turns to a broker who moves value with mispriced invoices at 15%. The parts arrive late. His customers pay more because their trucks can't wait for geopolitics. Somewhere else, a captain rehearses a weather script. A compliance analyst chooses to say no and misses a bonus. A middleman updates a spreadsheet of shells to rotate next quarter. The marketplace keeps selling what everyone needs. Doubt at scale, priced by the hour. Why it hits your wallet. The hidden tax of illicit finance. The fog doesn't stay at sea or on-chain. It settles in your fees, your shipping costs, and the time your money waits in review. Banks, insurers, carriers, everyone prices uncertainty. And when evasion gets better, the price climbs for people who never touched a sanctions list. Start with banks. Every time a DPRK-style network slips through a correspondent chain, regulators respond with fines, monitors, and new controls. Compliance budgets swell, screening tools, analytics feeds, investigators on night shifts. That overhead doesn't land on the operators. It lands on you as wire fees, wider FX spreads, higher minimum balances, and interest margins padded to absorb the next enforcement shock. If your small business pays suppliers in a corridor that's gone noisy, expect an enhanced diligence surcharge and a longer clock. De-risking multiplies the cost. When a strike like the September 15, 2005 BDA action rewires risk appetite, big banks don't trim, they exit entire categories: used cars, scrap metals, small remitters. Legitimate firms lose accounts and migrate to provincial banks with thinner balance sheets and thinner controls, or to underground exchangers with no recourse. Your payroll wire lands in pending because the system can't distinguish fog from rain fast enough. Days turn into a working capital problem you pay to bridge. Insurance follows the same math. Shadow fleets and spoofed AIS patterns raise maritime risk, so P&I clubs add exclusions and premium surcharges. Cargo insurers demand vessel risk reports, surveyor photos with verifiable metadata, and lab tests for commodities that became camouflage, recyclables, polymers, industrial fittings. Someone pays for those checks. Freight rates tick up. A container that cost $2,000 becomes $2,350 after a season of advisories and seizures. That difference shows up as a fuel surcharge or peak season adjustment on invoices that look routine. Trade friction lands on shelves quietly. Banks that used to fund documents in a day now ask for AIS histories, independent inspection certificates, and counterpart verification. Suppliers pad lead times and hold extra inventory because financed goods sit longer in review. Carrying that inventory isn't free. Financing costs climb when lenders widen spreads to reflect uncertainty. A blender, a phone case, a bag of coffee. Each picks up pennies of fog tax that add up when millions of purchases make the same trip. False positives are another bill you bear. Transaction monitoring tuned to catch invoice splitting and nested payments flags normal life. Your tuition payment to a foreign university looks like a front company settlement. Your donation to a charity in a high-risk region trips a screening rule. A split payroll to two accounts resembles structuring. Funds freeze. You dig up documents. Time becomes part of the price of trust stretched thin. Remittances get hit hardest. When major banks close risky corridors, migrant workers lose cheap formal channels. A $5 fee becomes $9 or $12, and delivery takes an extra day. That's groceries for a family. Shut too many pipes, and money shifts to informal exchangers who charge more and leave senders with no remedy when cash disappears. The attempt to starve illicit networks ends up taxing people who depend on clean rails. Dollar pressure has macro echoes. As Section 311 designations and secondary sanctions ripple, more trade settles in yuan or local currencies, and barter creeps back at the edges. Stablecoins turn into working capital for cross-border merchants. Fragmentation raises hedging costs. Managing multi-currency exposure and token volatility isn't free. Spreads widen because counterparties price new uncertainty into every contract. Your mortgage can feel it when banks hoard safe assets after a compliance shock and widen loan margins a few basis points. Over 30 years, that whisper is a car. Ports and customs add friction downstream. If coal moved as recyclables, inspectors slow that category for everyone. Legitimate recyclers wait in yards for lab results. Storage fees accrue. Per diem charges add up. Truckers idle at gates, burning time and fuel they'll bill to someone else. Those cents roll into wholesale prices and end up in your cart. There's a counterintuitive trap. Blunt bans and blanket exits feel decisive. They push value into corridors without brakes. Abuse gets easier. The hidden tax grows. Precision trims it. Beneficial ownership registries that capture control rights, not just names, make shells cost more. Data sharing compacts that let banks, carriers, and insurers verify steel, crews, and cargo in real time turn neat paper into insufficient evidence. Tie cheaper premiums and faster clearing to randomized inspections. AIS authenticity checks and lab tests, and honest traders outrun fraud. Trust is infrastructure. When it's clear, prices fall and wires move. When it's cloudy, everyone pays for the same fog a handful of operators profit from. The coal loaded at midnight and the tokens peeled on a Sunday become your Tuesday surcharge because the pipes are shared. Clean them with targeted pressure and the tax recedes. Leave them opaque and the fee becomes the water we all swim in. What actually works? Pressure that bites without backfiring. Blunt bans push value into places without breaks. Precision hurts where margins live and keeps lifelines open. Start at the hinges. Freight forwarders filing the same HS codes for half a district. Trust and company service providers minting shells by the dozen. OTC brokers converting tainted tokens to yuan by dinner. Pressure those nodes and corridors seize without closing ports. Pull a forwarder's carrier portal access and 3 lanes pause before cranes move. Sanction 2, OTC desks tied to known peel chains, and crypto exits jam the exact week a payment's due. Make data move faster than cargo. Build pipes, not press releases. Vessel risk scores, AIS integrity flags, surveyor photo metadata, shell link graphs shared legally across banks, carriers, and insurers. When a jittered invoice collides with a dark transfer gap and a shared IP login, a letter of credit pauses upstream. Quiet wins stack when the same pattern lands on the right screens at the same time. Reward verification. Tie cheaper premiums and faster clearing to randomized inspections, lab tests for recyclables, AIS authenticity checks with tamper-proof logs, and independent surveyor photos. Finance what's been seen and sampled, not just stamped. Honest traders sprint, gray actors bleed time and cash. Name control, not just owners. Beneficial ownership registries must capture rights, pledges, call options, covenants that let a lender fire boards. Add penalties for fiduciaries who file fiction. Pair with targeted secondary sanctions that include off-ramps, remediation plans, monitored probation, and re-entry. Pull borderline actors back to supervised rails instead of exiling them to shadows. Protect clean corridors. Pre-cleared humanitarian channels, safe harbor remittance routes with shared screening, and clear guidance that lets frontline analysts say yes quickly. Change incentives. Bonus teams for stopping bad flows and for greenlighting good ones fast. Time is the lever. Compress dwell time for detection, stretch dwell time for doubt. If verification is cheaper than evasion, margins flip. That's where this machine starves, at the price point where lying costs more than telling the truth. The next 5 years, scenarios and inflection points. Look ahead and both sides are automating. The network will pay for software that writes better lies. Cleaner invoices, smarter HS code choices, and vessel tracks generated to match wind, tide, and tug patterns so closely that anomaly tools hesitate. Detection answers with fusion. Satellite radar that sees through clouds, optical snapshots for hull matching, AIS integrity checks that spot spoofed IDs, radio frequency geolocation from crew phones, and wire metadata scored in real time. The tug moves from human judgment after the fact to models arguing in milliseconds. Stablecoins become workhorses. Dollar-pegged tokens let brokers settle across time zones without correspondent banks. Expect fewer smash-and-grab exchange heists and more patient intrusions at wallet-as-a-service providers, liquidity routers, and payment aggregators that hold keys for dozens of small firms. Social engineering drifts toward treasurers and freight clerks at logistics companies whose on-chain working capital now runs in the millions. Cash out points expand. Cross-border merchants accept tokens for inventory and settle with importers via offset invoices. OTC desks specialize in fast yuan for stablecoins. Weekend exits move through smaller exchanges with thin KYC when larger venues hold funds for review. At sea, the shadow fleet spreads and fragments. More old tankers and bulkers bought through layered trusts, flagged to fast registries, and insured by thin clubs that email PDFs before they answer phones. Ship-to-ship transfers push to new coordinates, higher latitudes, weather gaps, lightly patrolled coasts. Captains deploy AIS tracks generated to mirror local fishing rhythms and tug routes. Detection counters with multi-sensor mosaics. SAR for dark hulls, optical for hull fingerprints, RF sniffers catching handset pings, and draft change analytics that flag weight shifts invisible to paper. The result isn't shutdown, it's longer routes, steeper premiums, and schedules padded for alibis. On land, Russia deepens as a partner. Construction projects in the Far East request trainees, logging quotas expand, barter deals swap timber and stone for diesel and machine parts. Yuan corridors handle accounting inside Chinese banks far from New York's reach. Moscow's own evasion market registries gray insurers, parts brokers, overlaps with Pyongyang's. Burn one node and two networks flint. Watch for public MOU language about labor cooperation and skills exchange. That reads like staffing behind a podium smile. Cyber raids pivot from pools to plumbing. Bridges and exchanges stay targets, but the crown jewels become cross-chain routers, managed wallet platforms, and SaaS backends that aggregate withdrawals across clients. When Tier 1 venues harden, weak links appear upstream. A contractor's laptop, a vendor admin portal, a cloud bucket with keys. Laundering leans into instant cross-chain swaps, privacy layers that look like legitimate routing through decentralized protocols, and peel chains tuned to automated compliance thresholds. Fiat mules resurface around gaming platforms, gig economy payouts, and gift card rails where lots of small disbursements blend in. Recoveries land when operators reuse infrastructure or OTC desks cooperate under pressure. Average dwell time between theft and first mixer hop keeps shrinking. Chinese enforcement swings with politics. A tight quarter arrives when Beijing needs leverage elsewhere. Border checks spike, crossing slow, provincial banks trim limits, and brokers switch to barter scripts. Winter comes, growth wobbles, and managed leakage returns under fresh paperwork, workers relabeled as students, exports reclassified as domestic resale. The signal hides in small places. Truck counts on bridges, sudden closures of exchange houses in border cities, and bank memos that quietly cap cash deposits tied to general trade. Inside North Korea, leadership health scares or succession jitters scramble planning. A hospitalization rumor pulls cash forward, more bulk couriers, sudden crypto exits, emergency procurement of loyalty gifts. A consolidation brings a brief pause in visible smuggling, a reshuffle, then a machine rebuilt by operators who grew up in cyber rather than coal. Either way, the balance sheet keeps score. Quotas don't wait for politics to settle. Crypto market shocks create surprise hinges. If a top exchange stumbles or a major stablecoin wobbles, reserves tied up on that venue get trapped or haircut. Expect a scramble into multiple stablecoins, tokenized T-bills, and yuan corridors. Missteps follow, reused mixers, weekend exits through small venues that cooperate with seizures. For a quarter, clawbacks spike and OTC spreads widen. Then rotation becomes doctrine. More venues, shorter dwell times, scripted exit hierarchies. Precision enforcement picks spots that ripple. Another Section 311 style strike against a regional bank or a cluster of money service businesses snaps correspondent chains. Nested accounts flush, invoice splitting jumps until new pipes warm. In trade, insurers tie premium discounts to verified cargo audits and AIS authenticity checks with tamper-proof logs. Honest shippers save money, gray actors bleed. Beneficial ownership registries in 2 or 3 major hubs evolve to record control rights, pledges, call options, covenants, and require attestations with penalties that carry personal risk. Shell rotation slows because signing a lie gets expensive. For watchers, a checklist helps. Shipping anomalies, clusters of new dark gaps near unfamiliar STS points, draft changes that don't match declared cargo, name and flag cycles on a seasonal clock. OTC crackdowns, sudden closures in southern China and Hong Kong paired with on-chain pauses in wallets researchers already tied to DPRK-linked flows. Banking signals, treasury advisories that mention trade finance and MSBs in the same breath, often a prelude to correspondent lines snapping. Labor tells, regional announcements in Russia about training programs that sound like worksite staffing. Luxury clues, seizures of parts kits, engines, infotainment systems, rather than finished cars. The likely arc is compression, not collapse. Margins thin as evasion costs rise. The network gets more modular, more professional, more patient. Enforcement learns to reward verification and punish opacity without strangling remittances or humanitarian trade. AI raises both the ceiling and the floor, fewer obvious tells, fewer easy wins. The story stays human. Brokers pricing risk like inventory, bankers weighing revenue against blast radius, captains rehearsing weather scripts, analysts deciding when to say no. On both sides, speed and segmentation rule. And somewhere in Pyongyang, the ledger keeps humming, line by line, as the next 5 years play out on screens, on decks, and across desks where the same choices get made, only faster. Resolution and meaning. One quiet designation proved money runs on trust, and how quickly trust can be turned into leverage. If you want to see how these same pipes shape today's crises, watch the next chapter and subscribe. We dig into the fixers, banks, and brokers that set your fees and delays so we can force precision over fog.